Hello and welcome back to my Dandelion Diaries. We are continuing on with ink explorations today, and as voted by in the community, we will be doing brown inks. This color category won by a landslide, and I can totally agree with it because it is one of my favorite colors to write with. I do have 20 inks we will be doing today, 18 samples in 2 bottles. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump straight into supplies like normal, and then we'll continue on with swatches. So for supplies, I have an A5 sterling ink notebook here with the Sanzen Tomoe River paper. And then I'm going to be using my Kakimori brass dip nib today with the aluminum handle, a little acrylic block for my circle swatches. Oh, there it is. My pipette, a t-shirt over here as like kind of a dry rag situation, a couple of jars of water, and the normal, yeah, that's pretty much it. All right, let's go ahead and get started with the first ink here, and this is going to be Faber Castell's Cognac Brown. And this is a really nice orange toned brown that has a bit of a sandy vibe to it. Cognac is actually a really good name for it, even though I can't seem to spell cognac, because cognac brandy or cognac liquor is very much this color. And I wonder if you could paint with liquor and it would be a similar color, or if it would turn lighter. I don't know, but the color of this is lovely. Faber Castell is a pretty decent brand when it comes to inks. I have several samples from them. I don't have any full bottles, but I do like all of the samples I've tried. Some are definitely better than others, and this one I'm okay with. It's like in the middle. It does have some nice shading, but it's nothing super exciting when it comes to a brown ink. It's just a really nice kind of medium, warm, orangey brown. Next up we have Van Dieman's Peanut Brittle. And I adore this ink. It has such lovely shading, even in really fine nibs. So the color of this is a bit more of a yellow-orange brown. It definitely has a very strong yellow undertone, and the orange, it pulls through if you put it next to oranges, or the brown pulls through more if you put it next to browns. So this ink could kind of go in a couple different categories in my opinion. Van Dieman's as a brand is really nice. They have a crap ton of ink colors out there, and I like that they do little collections. So this is part of the Harvest collection. So there's other inks that are more food themed, and there's a variety of colors in that collection. Continuing on with another lightish colored brown. This is an Akkerman ink, and it is number 4, and I believe it's Hals Old Bruin. And this is another lovely lightish brown color, like I just mentioned. It has some interesting color to it. It is brown, but it's not orange. Like, it doesn't seem to have any orange in it, but it almost has a bit of a greenness to it in the back. It's not super strong, so it primarily comes off as very light brown, sand, beige even in some places, but it doesn't have quite the orange lean that most orange inks have. I find this one to be a bit more on the green side, maybe yellow, but definitely towards the green. Akkerman as a brand though is really nifty. Their Dutch Masters bottles are really quite cool. They have this glass ball that separates an ink reservoir on the top and the main reservoir on the bottom. Really kind of fun to play with if you can get your hands on just one bottle and then just go from there. But they are a bit more expensive. I actually recently found out that a lot of the Akkerman inks are close to the makers of Diamine, if not the same makers who make Diamine ink, which I think is really interesting. So I don't know if that's actually a true statement or not, but I just wanted to put it out there on the world. Next up we have an Inkebara ink, and this is called Brown Gray. And this ink has some pretty nifty shading, which is pretty common with most of the Inkebara inks that I've tried. But the color of this, I don't really know if I can classify as brown or gray. I think this is a really good name for this ink. I feel like it's really dynamic with the shading because parts of it are gray and parts of it do look very brown. It's just kind of an overall interesting color. I don't know if I can really say I have anything quite like this in other inks by other brands. I think I may have like a Birmingham Pen Company ink that's kind of close to this, but I think that's the only one, and I don't even remember the name of it. So I don't know. This one's very, very interesting. I will say Inkebara is a bit smaller in terms of brands. I haven't found a whole lot from them. I've tried several different colors that I could get my hands on at Finesse, but I don't really know where to buy where I could buy it in other retailers. Next up, we have a very popular brown ink, at least in terms of social media, and this is Colorverse's number 79 Coffee Break. And I can understand why this one is pretty popular. The flow in this ink is phenomenal, and the color is a nice chocolatey, like milk chocolate brown color. I don't really see it as coffee, maybe like a really weak coffee, but it does have some nice shading that might be a little bit more towards the darker coffee toned brown. The flow, though, is really what sells this ink for me. I'm not super crazy about a bunch of Colorverse inks just because their price point is a bit on the higher side for me, but some of their more standard line of inks, this one, Coffee Break, and then a pink they have which is called Andromeda, are some of my favorites. I do really like this brown ink and I would purchase a bottle. However, I have so many bottles of brown ink that every time I try to buy a new one, I tell myself no because I have so many more bottles that I'm still working through. Next up, we have a Diamine ink, and this one is called Tobacco Sunburst. And this is a really nice tobacco leaf color. I don't know if it's appropriate to say if you've ever seen like actual dried tobacco leaves, but this is pretty close to what they actually look like when it comes to the physical color of dried tobacco leaves. I do find that this ink shades very well on the original Tomoe River paper, so I'm interested to see how it does on the new Sanzen because I don't know if we're going to get the same level of shading. I will say Diamine as a brand is tried and true. They have 1,010,000 colors. They do an ink event every year now, at least they have for the past 4 years, and they have one for this year, and you can get 25 different inks for like $100, and I don't know. I really love Diamine. I think they have a huge selection of colors. Like there's a color for everybody when it comes to Diamine. This ink though is very unique and I don't know if I have another brown quite like it. And if we get the shading that I'm hoping we're going to get, it is very beautiful once it's completely dried down. And next up we have a newer ink to me that I recently swatched in one of my big ink swatch videos. And this is Lennon Toolbars Sesame Oil, and this was gifted to me by Allison during our ink swap. And the color of this was so stunning. It's a nice medium to light brown color, pretty neutral. It had a little bit of shading going on with it, and the flow was just juicy when it came to dip pens. The last time I used it, I think I had the Sailor Hokoro dip pen, and it worked very beautifully with that, even in the smaller writing. So I'm really hopeful when I put this in a pen, it's going to behave exactly like it did with that pen because I really like the color of this ink. Lennon Toolbar as a brand is pretty rare from what I found. There's not a lot of retailers that sell their inks in sample form. I've only ever found them to be sold in bottles, and in the States, those two places are Atlas Stationers and then Yoseka Stationery. So I don't know if you can get samples from Yoseka on these. I would definitely have to double check, but I really like the sample that Allison sent me, and I will definitely use it to completion because it is absolutely gorgeous ink. And then I have another ink that Allison sent me, and this is a Sailor Kobe ink, and this is Ginza Gold Sepia. And I do apologize on pronunciation of some of these inks. I do try my best, and I try to listen to Google Translate's version, so just correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I really do appreciate any kind of help I can get with the different languages these inks have. But the ink color of the Ginza or Ginza Gold Sepia is this kind of muddy brown with a little bit of a yellow lean and a little bit of a greenness to it as well. In larger swatches, you get a lot of haloing going on and some shading, at least on the original Tomoe River paper, but we'll see what happens on the Sanzen. But the color of this is a nice deeper medium brown, not quite dark brown to me, but it does have some darker brown areas within it. Kobe as a brand usually has very wet inks. At least all of the inks I have tried from them have been nice and juicy, and the fact that I guess this is a Sailor times Kobe collaboration, I feel like this is going to be a winner all around. Next up we have Papery Plume's Pecan, and all I have to say about this one is shading. Shading, shading, shading. The color ranges from like this muddy yellow toned brown to more of a deeper orangey toned brown to having kind of like a brown black haloing situation going on. Just this ink is so cool. I actually had been on the hunt for a bottle of this ink for a long time, and I still have not found a retailer that sells a full bottle of it. So if you know where to get it in a full bottle form, please let me know, because the dynamicness of this ink is just so beyond a lot of the other brown inks that I will be swatching today. And then for the last ink on this page, I'm going to go ahead and do Scarecrow by Wearingeul, and this is part of their Wizard of Oz collection. And this one is super nifty. So when you first swatch it down, it almost looks kind of green. And on camera, it's showing up very brown, but in front of me, it's very green. So I would definitely say the base of this is more of a green tone brown, but as it dries, it shifts more towards that neutral brown color. It's very cool. I will say this does have a bit of a yellowness to it and a bit of an orange and a bit of a green. So it's another one of those inks that it's really hard to pinpoint for me personally what undertones it actually has, because it has like a rainbow of them at this point. This ink does have some very nice shading as well, from more of a lighter toned brown to a darker toned brown. But I do find this ink to be a little bit on the drier side, so I try to put it in my pens that have really good flow. The next ink I have is a Sailor ink, and this is from Ink Studio, and this is number 673. And I consider this one to be more of a like mahogany brown. It has a bit more of a redness to it, and the shading in it is lovely. It does have a little bit of haloing to it as well when it dries down, which I can appreciate, but I find this ink to just be a really nice, good fall ink. I don't know why, it just reminds me of like, I don't know, that warm, sunsetty, over the woods kind of vibe. It's just really nice. Sailor Ink Studio has every single color you could probably think of in your head, because they just have, I think, 1,000 different colors at this point. I don't even know how many are in the actual Ink Studio line, but there's a bunch. And the browns, they have, again, a bunch. I prefer this one, and then I think Ink Studio 680 is the other one I really reach for. It's a bit of a deeper brown. I'm not going to be swatching that one today, but this one definitely has more of a reach for me because it is a bit lighter and it matches more of my autumn fall vibes whenever I'm reaching for a nice red toned brown. Next up we have a Vinta ink, and this is Pamana. And this is again another really nice rich red toned brown, but this one has a bit of sheen. At least on the original Tomoe River paper it had sheen, so we'll see what happens today. But the color of this is again that kind of deeper red toned brown. The flow on this ink too is very, very wet. I do find that it feathers on rhodia paper for me for some reason, and I don't know why, but everything else I've tried it on, it's done fine, including the Sanson, so we'll see what happens today. Vinta as a brand, I am still kind of experimenting with. I have a few inks in a bunch of different colors from them at this point, but the flow of all the ones I've tried have been nice. This one's just a bit wetter than the other ones that I've tried. Next up, we have I think it's Kaweco inks. It's Kyo No Oto, and this is number 10, and I believe it's Ochiguriiro. I'm really gonna butcher this one, so I'm super sorry in advance. And this ink is a lovely warm brown black. It does have a bit of shading, but I find it's primarily just within the same color family, nothing super substantial. And I find that the darker tones in this ink definitely pull through more in writing than the lighter tones. Overall, it's a lovely color. I don't really find it super unique compared to some of the other darker brown colors I have, so I don't really reach for it all that often, but it is a nice darker toned brown color. The brand itself I find very difficult to obtain. I've only been able to get samples from Vanessa, and I don't even know if they sell these inks at Yoseka, which is the other place I usually find really good Japanese inks. So not 100% sure on this one. But again, color really nice, brand a little bit elusive. Next up, we have a personal favorite of mine, and this is a Kaweco ink. I feel like all of the Kaweco inks are favorites, but this is Caramel Brown. And this is a personal favorite of mine specifically because of the shading, but also because it's offered in cartridges and in like international cartridges. So this ink has some nice kind of yellowy toned brown shading in it, but it also has a bit of a brown black situation going. It's pretty dynamic, which I know I say a lot about. I know I say about a lot of inks that they're dynamic, but this one I find to be a bit more of a muted dynamic. So when you write with this one, it definitely showcases the shading very well. Anything from a fine to a medium nib. I have not put it in extra fine, so I can't speak to that one. But I really do like to put this in my Kaweco macchiato pen with a fine nib, and it does excellent. I also like to put this in my Esterbrook ST Tortoise. I feel like it's a really good match for that pen as well. This would not be an ink video now if it didn't include a Birmingham Pen Company ink. This is Sandstone. And this ink is so cool. So when you first swatch it down on the page, it almost has like a green sandy color to it. And then as it dries, it gets very dark brown in the shading. Really nice. The flow of Birmingham Pen Company inks I have talked about a million times at this point. I adore every single color I have tried, and I have not had a dry experience yet. Even with their lighter inks, I don't really find them that dry. Anyways, this ink by itself though is absolutely stunning with the shading, and I am so grateful that Priscilla sent this to me last year in an ink swap because I have loved it. I have loved it so much. Next up, we have a Noodler's ink, and this is called L. Lawrence. And this is a really nice brown black with a bit of a green undertone. It has some pretty decent shading and writing too, but like most of the Noodler's inks, I tend to have issues with them. Their inks are very wet and they take forever to dry for me, at least on the papers that I like to use, typically being the original Tomoe River paper, the Sans and Tomoe River paper, Midori, and Rhodia. On all of those papers, this ink either feathers or just takes forever to dry, which is such a shame. I will say that Noodler's is a really reasonably priced ink brand, at least in the States, and they have a whole bunch of colors to choose from. I know Goulet Pens has a very large selection of their inks, but I personally just don't really reach for my Noodler's inks anymore just because of the dry time factor being super annoying. Next up, we have one of the newer Robert Oster inks, and this is Sepia Nights. I believe this came out back in either April or May of 2024. I'm not 100% sure on the month, but it was this year in 2024. Robert Oster's Sepia Nights is a really nice brown black color with a bit of a purple undertone, which I find very unique specifically to this ink. I don't think I've ever had a purple toned brown before. Well, actually that's a lie. Beaver toned. Ferris Press's Beaver Dam Brown is also a very purple leaning brown. But I will say that the flow of this ink is pretty wet, and Robert Oster as a brand has a very wide range of colors, from inks ranging like to the lightest of lights to the darkest of darks. And I will say their lighter inks typically are a bit drier and their darker inks are a bit wetter. So don't really know why the flow is that way. But color wise, this is lovely, very dark, very good ink for maybe more of a career setting or an office setting because it's dark but still a little bit fun because of the dark or like more brown toned shading that it has going on. Next up, we have one of the Platinum Classic inks, and this is Sepia Black. And this is a really good substitute for the Noodler's L. Lawrence, in my opinion. So the Noodler's L. Lawrence is a bit darker, but the Sepia Black has way better flow. I will say that the shading on the classic series of these, like the Citrus Black, Lavender Black, Forest Black, all of them start off as one color, and then as they dry down, they get darker all the way to a complete black shade in some areas. So cool. I adore this ink. I do find it a bit more on the green side than the brown side, so I don't reach for it as often as I do like the Citrus Black, which is my favorite from that line, but it is a very lovely color and very unique with the shading again. I would definitely pick this one over the Noodler's L. Lawrence, even though it is much pricier. I just feel like this ink behaves just way better. And then the second to last ink I have here is 3 Oysters Americano. And this is a very dark brown ink and a very wet ink. I find this one actually has a hard time drying for me, which I think Priscilla mentioned this happened with her green one that she had, the Namasan. But this one behaves like that. It's super wet when you first use it, and then it stays wet for a very long time, much like the Noodlers. I will say the color of this is a bit more of a red toned brown black. It does have a bit of a redness to it, but looking at it next to Sepia Nights, it might be more of that purple tone than red, but they're slightly different. Definitely Americano is a bit more red. I will say this is a pretty good color comparison to the Americano coffee drink, that it is that dark black coffee look to it. It's really quite nice. I wish it dried a little bit faster because it is a really nice brown black color. And then the last ink that I have for today is by Dominant Industry, and this is part of their standard, and this is Lungo. And this ink is a lovely chocolatey brown with black shading and a little bit of a black sheen. I love this ink. I mean, I have a full bottle of it for a reason. I think it is a really great, just standard dark brown color. I actually really want to mix this with some of my other Dominant Industry inks to create more of a darker brown undertone on some of them, but I hadn't made that plunge yet. But I will say that this ink is a great standard dark brown color, and the sheen and the shading in it just kind of sell it for me in terms of a great everyday writing color. Okay, I'm gonna let these finish drying down, and then I'll be back in a little bit and do some close-ups of the inks on this page, and then I will also go to my old swatch book and we'll flip through the season 1 or the first group of brown inks that I did last year too. But I'll see you guys in a second. Okay, I am back. I'm gonna go ahead and zoom you guys in and we'll do some close-ups. So starting off, we had Faber-Castell's Cognac Brown. As I mentioned, it is definitely a very orange toned brown with some pretty nice shading. It is on the lighter side of browns, but it's still very legible because of the medium brown shading that it has. There is a very minor sheen poking out on this, which I've never seen before, so that's kind of interesting. But overall, just the shading is what sells this ink for me, and it is a really nice warm brown color. Then we have Van Diemen's Peanut Brittle, which is showing very orange on camera, and it is definitely the yellowest ink out of everything I swatched today, but I do still consider this in the brown family because the shading does go more towards the brown side. I think this is a very great ink for summer. I actually inked this up in June, I believe. I really love this one. The shading is awesome, and I like that it is part of a Harvest series by Van Diemen's, just because it's kind of food related. I don't know, it's kind of fun for me. Then we had Akkerman's Hals Old Bruin, and this is a lovely sandy tan brown. It has a little bit of that black haloing going on. When I've swatched this before, it shades a lot more, so I don't know if this is the new scents and paper and just how this ink's gonna look, but I still see the haloing showing up, at least in the dip pen writing. I'll have to test this out in another pen on the new scents and paper, and we'll see how it goes, but overall the color is a very nice, warm, yellowy toned sand color. Then we had Inkebara's Brown Gray, and on camera it's showing up very, very gray. In person it's a little bit more of like a pinky brown color. This is just a very, very unique colored ink. I find that I don't really have anything else quite like it. It is pretty standalone. Overall, it really is the shading that just kind of sells it for me though. Then we have a crowd favorite, and this is Colorverse's Coffee Break. Absolutely love this one too. Love the flow of it mainly, and the color is a nice rich brown. I find that the shading is lovely on the original Tomoe River paper. I'll have to see if enough of that shading comes through on the new Sanzen, but I definitely like the swatch that turned out. It's pretty close to what it originally looked like for me. Then we have Diamine's Tobacco Sunburst, and sadly the whole swatch shaded, so you can't really see the kind of like sandy, like yellowy tone in the back here, but it's kind of like this color in the base of this, but a little bit yellower. I really like this ink. I think it has very good flow, and the shading in it is very nice. Kind of disappointing the whole thing shaded, but it is what it is. It's a nice burnt orange color, burnt brown color with a little bit of a yellow undertone. Then we have Lennon Toolbar's Sesame Oil. I seriously am so glad I get to play with this ink some more and compare it to some of the others. Really don't have another brown like this on the page. I'm going to compare this to Oyster Hour though, which I swatched last year, and we're going to see how close they are together for myself. Then we have Sailor Kobe's Ginza Gold Sepia. Very nice, warm-toned, medium brown with some darker brown shading. Again, the whole swatch kind of shaded for me here. It does have a black sheen showing up on this as well, but a lovely, nice, deeper brown color. Then we have Papery Plume's Pecan. I just love, 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 love the shading in this one. It has almost like a, how do I want to describe it? Like a cloudiness to it maybe, almost, I don't want to say swampy because that just sounds bad, but it does have a bit of like a fluid look to it in the shading. The swatch does a really good job showcasing that, but you can also kind of see it down here in the Pecan writing where the shading just kind of was fluid through it, but the shading is definitely more of like a pinky brown to a more yellow brown in some areas with some darker brown haloing. It's a very cool ink. Then we have Wearingeul's Scarecrow, which on in person it's more yellow, and then on camera it's a bit more orange. So take that with a grain of salt. I would definitely pick up a sample of this if you haven't tried it. The shading in it is phenomenal. It is a bit on the drier side of inks, but it's not so dry that it's a problem. Like, I still do just fine in almost any pen I've put it in. It does have a very minor black sheen in the swatch as well, which is kind of interesting. Then we had Sailor Ink Studios 673. I still think mahogany is the best way I can describe this one. It is a lovely red toned brown. There is a bit of a green sheen showing up here as well, which is kind of nice to see. And then we had Vinta Pamana, which has lots of green sheen, which I'm very happy showed up on the Sands and paper, because on the original Toy River paper, the sheen is just lovely, 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 lovely. So this ink is another kind of more red toned brown, but it's a bit more, I guess, orange, like red orange versus pure red. Like, it's not as red as this ink. It's definitely a little bit more orange. And then we had Kyo No Oto Ochiguriiro. Again, my pronunciation of the Japanese inks is seriously something I'm trying to work on, so I apologize deeply for my mispronunciations. But this is definitely a nice brown black. It has some strong black sheen going on, which I don't remember having, but as you can see, it has that darker brown to brown black shading. So in writing, I primarily get the darker blackish brown color, though. I've never really gotten this lighter color in any of the writing I've tried. Then we had Kaweco's Caramel Brown, seriously one of my favorites. I just love the dynamic shading in this as well. It does have that kind of yellow grayness to it, which most Kaweco inks do have, and this one has a bit of a black sheen, but it's not so strong that it comes really, like, it doesn't come off in writing a whole lot for me. Really like this one, especially because it is offered in cartridges. Then we have Birmingham Pen Company's Sandstone. Just such a cool shading ink. It does start off a bit green and then it shades down to this darker brown color. Very, very cool. I'm obsessed with Birmingham Pen Company. I've talked about it a million times and I'll just keep talking about it until I just get over it, I guess. Then we had Noodler's L. Lawrence. This ink is actually finally dry. Oh, okay, I misspoke. I just smeared some of it on my hand. Yeah, Noodler's doesn't dry for me, I'm sorry. But the color of this is a nice green toned brown with some really nice shading, and I definitely think the Platinum Sepia Black is a great alternative if you wanted something similar. They're obviously not the same, this is a bit more green, but the shading is very close in the Platinum Sepia Black. And on that note, Robert Oster Sepia Nights, which was the next one we swatched, is definitely more of a purple toned black brown color. This has a black sheen that's popping through that's very matte. It's a very dark ink, but it is a nice off black color, which I really, really appreciate. Then we had Platinum Sepia Black, which I just mentioned. I do love this line of ink, how it starts at this one color and then goes all the way to black. It's just so, so cool. So, so, so cool. Then we had 3 Oysters Americano, and this one again is more of that black brown color, off black, whatever you want to call it. It is very similar to the Sepia Nights, but it is a bit more red. So this is a bit more purple and this is definitely a little bit more red. And then we had Dominant Industries Lungo, which is a lovely medium toned deep brown color with a bit of a redness to it and this black sheen. Really like this as a great standard darker brown ink color. Okay, now we're going to go back to previous seasons. So this was the dark brown inks that I did back in 2023. Robert Oster's Melon Tea is a really good one. The Diatramentis Document Sepia Brown is really, really nice if you want a darker, like more permanent brown ink. And then Diatramentis Document Black Red is another one that's more brown, but this, I don't know, it's kind of a weird ink. One of my favorites on this page, though, is definitely the Writing Desk by Ferrisol Press. Just the color is a nice, I don't know, it's got that nice orangey brown with the green sheen that's really cool. Pick Me Up by Diamine is a scented ink. Otherwise, I'd probably pick that one because it's definitely a bit cheaper. But I wanted to compare Beaver Dam Brown to Sepia Nights, since this one's, again, more purple toned. The Sepia Nights is a bit darker. The sheen in it is a bit blacker. The Ferrisol Press one has a bit more of a brown tone sheen, but they're very close in color for sure. Then we did, I think it was light browns next. Yeah. So then we had light browns. So here's Inaho next to Workshop Wishes. Ferrisol Press Oyster Hour. Okay, so sesame oil is much darker than Oyster Hour, which is exactly what I wanted to see. And it looks like it's a bit more yellow. The Oyster Hour seems to be a bit more on the like beigey orange side. That's kind of interesting. But actually it's kind of close to the Cobblestones, Gion's Cobblestones by Kaweco. That's kind of interesting as well. Diamine's Dusted Truffle is a lovely, lovely brown ink. I don't have anything close to this. The Guyon's Cobblestone is close, but it's not the same. Not at all. This is much darker. This is much more of that kind of muddy brown color. It's so beautiful. Then we had regular browns. I think, did we have one more? No. Okay, this is the last brown ink I did in 2023. And this is, I guess, more of like the standard line of browns. So we have Pilot Roshizuku Tsukushi, Rest in Peace, Monteverde's Scotch Brown, Herbon's Café de Ilis, Lit de Thé is a really popular one that's definitely more yellow based. Akkerman's SBRE Brown, one of my absolute favorites. It's definitely more of an orange brown. I wish I had a better comparison for this, because I've heard people say that Pelican's Brilliant Brown is really close to this, but the sample I have is very orange, so I don't know if that's true or not. So I don't know, but Esprit Brown is definitely one of my favorites. And then Cafe Crema is again more of an orangey toned brown, but it has a bit more of a warm, like yellow warmness to it. It's very, very nice. Overall, I would definitely say that brown is probably one of my favorite color families to write with, just because it fits in any season for me. I always have a way I could use a brown ink, although I will say fall is probably the primarily brown season, I guess, because that's, you know, when all of the leaves are falling and it's pretty and blah, blah, blah. Anyways, I do have a question for anybody who's watching this video. If you use brown ink, do you have a specific one that you really reach for all of the time, and why is that? Because I find that I reach for the more medium toned browns all the time, and I don't really have a specific one that I pull more than the others. So I want to know if anybody out there has a very favorited brown ink that they're just head over heels for. Anyways, I want to thank you so much for watching, for joining me here today for this lovely ink exploration of brown inks. Stay tuned for community posts to vote on the next color. We are getting close to the end of all of the color families, so it's going to be a bit of a tighter race to see what comes next. But anyways, again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.